You're listening to the Author Inside You podcast, a weekly podcast designed to motivate you to finish writing a book, choose a publisher, and have your work build an audience. Keep listening if you're looking to get propelled into the next chapter of your life. And now, it's the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.
Hello, and welcome to the Author Inside You podcast. I'm Matt Rafferty.
And I'm Leah Rafferty.
Joining us today is Scott Dikkers, author of Outrageous Marketing, The Story of the Onion, and How to Build a Powerful Brand with No Marketing Budget. In 1996, Scott founded the world's first humor website, theonion.com, and he co-wrote and edited The Onion's first original book, Our Dumb Century, which has sold over 1 million copies and debuted as a #1 New York Times and a #1 Amazon bestseller. Welcome, Scott. Thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. And you obviously have been a very successful writer since college. And can you tell us a little bit about how you started The Onion and your first book?
Yeah, so I self-published my first book in 1989, before Amazon, before the internet, and it was a very different world back then. But I was a cartoonist, and I had drawn this daily comic strip long enough that I had enough strips to put together in a book collection, which were very popular at that time, like with The Far Side and Calvin and Hobbes and all these other comic strips that would put out these collections. And my strip was very popular on the campus of the University of Wisconsin and at some other colleges where I self-syndicated it. So I knew there'd be an audience for this book. It was still risky. Like, it cost me $5,000 to print the book.
Wow.
And I had to track down how you get a UPC symbol. I had to contact this company in Ohio that made the UPC symbol. I had to get in touch with the R.R. Borker company, I think they were called, broker. I can't remember. This is all ancient history.
Yeah.
But you had to get like an ISBN number, and it was very complicated. And spending all this money, it was risky because I wasn't sure. Like, you're pretty sure you're going to sell it, but you never know.
Right.
And I hand delivered it to bookstores, sold it on consignment, and it was like 50% discount, which is pretty standard bookstore discount. Publishers sell the book for $6, and the cover price of the book is $12. And so I made, $6 a book or whatever. And I made back my $5,000, and
Great.
The book made the New York Times bestseller list.
Wow.
So,
you must have been like, I can't believe it.
How do you do that? That is great.
Yeah, well, as you may know, how you get on the New York Times bestseller list is a kind of Rube Goldberg system of, they don't actually count the numbers of books. They count certain sales in certain stores, and they have all this very arcane, hidden, secret way that they figure out how to make a book a bestseller. And I guess my book sold at just the right stores, and the strip was really popular in these college campuses. And a lot of these stores, they existed in like sort of liberal towns with colleges in them, and those are some of the stores that the New York Times looks at. And I just got lucky, and I peaked at like number 9 on the list. It was a really great experience. And then after that, I was approached by a major publisher, the same publisher that does the Calvin and Hobbes and the Far Side books.
Wow.
Saw my book. They wanted to publish the rest of them in that series. I did like 6 books in that series, and then during that time, The Onion was growing. The Onion was founded in 1988 as a newspaper, and it went online in 1996. And then I had done a couple other books up to that point, but then we wanted to do an Onion book, and we did a deal with a publisher and got a big advance. And so now we were like in the big leagues, and we were like real, had an agent, we were authors, we went on TV, like it was a whole different category. So I've left The Onion several times, but I most recently left it about 4 or 5 years ago. And because I never associated my name with The Onion, I was always hiding behind the brand, and I didn't want people to know the names of the people involved, because I wanted the brand to be the star, because that's how you build a brand. And I found when I left and wanted to do books on my own, I'm back at square one. Like, nobody knows who I am. Nobody knows my name. So it's not like I can waltz into any publisher and say, here, I got a book idea. I have to. So there's Amazon and there's self-publishing, and I'm on the same playing field as everybody else, putting out a book and trying to market it best I can and hoping that it sells. But I actually prefer self-publishing.
So tell us, why is it that you prefer self-publishing?
It's really simple. It's dollars and cents. So Amazon gives you a 70% royalty. A publisher gives you a 7% royalty.
Wow.
So you're talking about 10 times the money. And the other thing a publisher gives you is an advance, which you don't get from Amazon. But typically with a publisher, the advance is all you'll ever see. So you might get an advance of, it could be anywhere from $5,000 to millions of dollars if you're a celebrity. And when we were at The Onion, we would get like $1 million advance for a book. But when I'm doing a book by myself, I'm more in the 5 to 6 figure range. And that's the only money you'll ever see.
Okay.
So they never earn out that advance because royalties have to pay back that advance. And so I don't know how they stay in business, but they lose money on almost all their books. The only books they make money on are the ones written by Oprah Winfrey or, the big multi-million dollar seller, Barack Obama, whatever. Mm-hmm. So everything else is a lost leader. But when you self-publish, you get a royalty for the rest of your life, 70% royalty, and it never stops. So if you're willing to play the long game, it's so much smarter financially to self-publish at this point.
Well, just a quick question about those royalties. So
sure.
if you have 7% and you never get to the 10,000 or 50,000 or whatever they gave you, do they come back after a little while and say, hey, we'd like some money back?
They never do that because it's an advance. It's a vote of faith in your book. They think, we believe in this book. We think it's going to sell X amount. And you may not ever earn back the advance from your 7% royalty, but that's okay. It's not like they lost money because they're making a lot, $6-7 per book. So they're fine. When I said they lose money, I was being facetious. If your book really doesn't sell anything, I guess it's possible they could lose money if they gave you a huge advance and you really never sold that many. But no, nobody asks for that money back. Even at one time, so with The Onion's first book, we completed the manuscript. We had a contract with Hyperion, which was a publisher owned by Disney. And we turned in the book, completed it, and Disney's lawyers looked at it and crossed out every other story in the book because they said it was too offensive. It had to do with sex or drugs or politics. And it was a book about the history of the 20th century. Like you said, it was called Our Dumb Century through fake front pages of The Onion. And we're like, wait a minute, how can you tell the story of the 20th century without sex, drugs, and politics? And we basically pulled out of the contract. And I told my agent, okay, we're done with them. Get us a new publisher. And we signed with a new publisher. They gave us a whole new advance. We kept the advance from Disney. It was like $150,000.
Oh, wow.
Because we held up our end of the deal. We turned in a book. And the fact that they didn't want a book was their problem. And, of course, like you said, the book went on to be a #1 bestseller, sold millions of copies. And it was a #1 overall on Amazon, which is rare.
Well, I'd like to say thank you to you for saying that or sharing that, because I think some people feel if they don't have a publisher, they're not really an author. So I think that gives credit to people. Yeah, self-publish, because just like you said, you're going to make more money and you're in control of what you are writing also. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's important.
Yeah. So, still being published by a traditional publisher in the eyes of many people gives you legitimacy. It makes you look like you're a real author, and you're going to get reviewed in the New York Times Review of Books. Well, you're not, but at least it gives you the potential to be. They're not going to review a self-published book. And publishers sometimes send you on book tours where you're going to be on TV or go to book signings or whatever. But I feel like that's rapidly changing. I feel like self-published authors are starting to inch their way into legitimacy very quickly.
Well,
yes, we feel that way also.
Right.
Yeah, and there's new ways to market through all the podcasts and also just self-advocating for yourself.
And social media. I mean, we've talked to lots of authors who have found their own way onto TV and onto radio shows and and
there's all sorts of ways.
You don't necessarily need an agent.
And I find that a lot of the self-published authors are smarter about marketing because they're in the trenches and they have to market in order to sell their book and make a living, whereas the big publishers, they're living off the fat of their, huge best-selling book by, the celebrity that they signed with, the basketball player or the politician or whatever. And so they don't really have to push your book that hard, and they go through a lot of traditional routes. But the self-publishers are like guerrilla marketers. And I found out that I was I learned some of that stuff. And one of the big things I learned from the first book I self-published after I left The Onion was I titled my book based on a common search term. So I knew that if people just searched that term, my book would come up, and it still comes up at number one on Google, because when you're on Amazon, Amazon is seen as very legitimate by the Google search engine. So
yes.
I started searching phrases based on the topic of my book, and it was a book about how to write humor. It was a nonfiction book about just spilling out all my secrets about how to write comedy. And I searched the phrase "how to write funny," and it got a good number of, like, maybe a few hundred searches a month on Google. And I thought, okay, that's my audience.
Yes.
And I titled the book that, and sure enough, it worked. And then I titled my podcast that, and my website that. And so now I dominate the front page of Google. If anybody types "how to write funny," and positioning myself as kind of the expert in teaching people how to write humor, which has been a really fun new chapter for me.
Just by doing a little work and figuring out what people are searching for, which isn't that difficult, and you can do for free.
It's often just a tiny little tweak and a little bit of work at the beginning that can make so much difference in marketing.
Excellent. So tell us about your latest book, and how much were you involved in the actual formatting and putting it all together?
Yeah, the latest book is the Outrageous Marketing book. And I did that book because I had been on the lecture circuit and started talking about the Onion and how it was founded, because there's a lot of funny stories surrounding the Onion's founding, because it's a wacky humor publication and there are a lot of crazy antics. And we see all these books about the National Lampoon coming out, where it's just fun to see the wacky stories of these college kids trying to do a humor publication. And so I would go to colleges and I would tell these stories, and people loved them. And then I started getting invited to, like, entrepreneur conferences to talk about the marketing of the Onion and the brand building involved, because it's such a well-liked company that has millions of social media followers. And I realized that I was kind of being not pushed, but I was realizing that I was an expert in this niche, but I also had a funny story to tell. So I wanted to kind of combine those two things and tell the story of the Onion, but also make it an actionable book with tips about how to start a business, how to build a brand, and make it kind of impervious to failure, which is how we built the Onion.
Well, it sounds perfect for a self-published author to read the book with no marketing budget. I mean, I think that's right up all our alley.
Totally. So, and that's how I always start anything. I start with by bootstrapping, and I don't like to invest any money in anything. I don't like to take chances. I like to make sure I've got a really good audience that's going to be interested in the book, and then I do my best to try to get the word out. But as far as, like, how involved I was in the formatting and everything, I did basically all of that. I know how to use InDesign, and I bought Scrivener to write, which is a program authors use. And InDesign to me is priceless, because you can lay out a whole book and then you can output a PDF and upload it to Amazon. And I know how to use Photoshop, because at the Onion I was, photoshopping presidents' faces on actors' bodies for so many years. I knew how to do all that. So I knew how to make a cover and knew how to make it to specs and formatted it. I'm an editor myself, so I copy edited it. I did have a couple of other people read it, because it's always a good idea to get other set of eyes on it. But yeah, I designed the cover, and I designed the interior, and basically spit out the PDF on my laptop and uploaded it to Amazon.
Wow. And did you have
it was a number one new release.
Wow. Great.
Yeah.
First off, did you have any copyrighted material in your book? And then how did you deal with that?
No, I didn't include any, like, material from the Onion, for example, unless it was excerpted. It was all just personal stories from my history with the Onion. So yeah, it was all original material.
Okay. And then when you published it on Amazon, how did you go about being a number one right away?
So that was something. So I've taken a couple of courses in how to market books online. There are some really good ones. There's Mark Dawson. There's Nick Stevenson, I think is his name. I hope I'm getting that last name right. But Your First 10,000 Readers, I think, is the name of his stuff.
Okay.
And Mark Dawson has ads for authors and a bunch of other courses. So I invested a good amount of money in courses, because I really wanted to know this stuff. And I also have an assistant who works for me, a marketing assistant. And so I had her take the courses. And basically, Amazon lets you choose like 12 different categories for your book. And this is something I learned from Chris Fox, who's another author who sells courses, and he puts out a ton of YouTube videos on how he markets his books. And he's so transparent. It's just wonderful. He'll show you his income statements. He'll tell you exactly what he did, and it's really helpful. I learned a lot from him. And basically what I did was I chose categories that I knew I could compete in. So Amazon has so many categories of books, and you get to choose like 2 or 3 when you're uploading your book, but then you can email them later and add like 9 more.
Oh.
And the more categories you can get for your book, the better your chances of getting to a number 1 status in any one of them. And once you're number 1, you're just more visible, and you get that little number 1 badge. And so that's one thing I did, was being really smart about the categories. Number 2, I made sure that my description had a lot of keywords in it. And I did a ton of keyword research, which is free and easy. You can there's a great plugin for Chrome called Keywords Everywhere that I use that is free. And it's just, when you type in a term in Google, it'll tell you how many people search for that term every month. And so I searched for terms about building a brand or building a business. And I put as much of the search terms in my title as possible, which is why the subtitle is How to Build a Brand with No Marketing Budget, because people are searching for that. And people are searching for the story of the onion. People want to know the history of the onion. So those are 2. And then there were a bunch of others, just like marketing, branding, brand marketing, business startups, terms like that. And I put as many of those terms as possible in the description of my book. Same with my other book, the How to Write Funny book. I put in search terms that people were searching for besides how to write funny. People were searching for how to write humor, how to write a joke, how to write satire. So I put all that in the description, and that helps Google find those terms, and it just gets more eyeballs on your book.
Great.
So yeah, first thing was category. Second thing was description, making sure that's has a lot of keywords in it. And then the third thing I did was I put together a street team, which is a team of, I had about 20 to 30 people. They were all former comedy students of mine. And I just reached out to them and said, hey, do you want to be on my street team? It means you get an advance copy of the book. You read it. I give it to you for free. And then you write a review on Amazon. And then there's a drawing based on everybody who writes a review. And people can win Amazon gift cards and stuff like that. So you're not allowed to pay people to write reviews. That's against Amazon's rules. But you can have a drawing. You can have a contest. That's totally permissible.
Oh, excellent.
So it allowed me to debut my book at number 1 and have a bunch of reviews come in, all of which help push it to the top of Amazon's search algorithm so more people see it.
Great. Excellent
And
advice.
then the fourth thing I did was more recent. So that book came out, I believe, in the fall of last year. And obviously after that first initial push, sales tend to drop off a little bit unless it's a perennial. Like, luckily, my first book, How to Write Funny, is a perennial seller. It just sells the same amount month after month. It's been out for 4 years because it's more of a reference book.
Okay.
And I did a sequel to that one, which is having the same luck, which is great. But the Outrageous Marketing book, less of a perennial. So what I started doing was running ads for it. And that was a situation where there's so much nuance about how to run ads correctly so they actually work, that my marketing assistant, again, I took that class, the Ads for Authors class from Mark Dawson, and a couple of other classes, and figured out how to put together an ad, what type of ad, and it's all Amazon ads. I was doing Facebook ads, but there's no way to track how many people are looking at your ad and then buying the book. There's no direct correlation, really tricky. You just don't know if you're burning money or not. With Amazon ads, you can actually track how many sales came from people who saw the ad, which is really helpful.
Yes, I would think so.
And we just cracked the code on this book where we figured out if we spend $3 on advertising, we sell 2 books. And
wow,
so
that's great.
It is great because 2 books, I think I make about $12 on that. So if you can spend $3 to make $12, there you've got a sustainable business on your hands.
Right. I'm going to send you $3.
Yeah.
Invest in Scott Dikkers.
As for as little as $3.
Quadruple your money. Yeah.
So Scott, a couple minutes ago, you were talking about you wrote back to Amazon after your book was published, and they let you get into 9 more categories. Can you elaborate on that?
That's basically it. It's unfortunately, I don't know the email address offhand, but it's all publicly available on Amazon's website. If you look into categories, you go to their help section. It's something really simple like support@kdp.com. That's kindledirectpublishing.com, something like that. And you simply request more categories and you tell them what categories you want to be in. And you select those categories by going in and looking at other books that are similar to yours and seeing what categories they're in. Or just start searching obscure categories that don't have a lot of competition but that relate to your book. Like for this book, you might find a book on the history of newspapers, which is a pretty boring topic that nobody's really interested in, but it relates perfectly to my book. So I get myself in that category. And then lo and behold, I'm number one in some of these obscure categories because they're so obscure.
Right. And so then everybody writes the reviews, your book sales go up the first day, you become number one, and now you can use that as part of your marketing.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, I do public speaking a lot. So if I speak to entrepreneurs, I mention the book and I put it on a screen behind me. And like, this is all kind of new stuff to me. I've never been much of a salesperson. I'm an artist and a joke teller. That's been primarily my whole adult career. But doing all this stuff has taught me to get comfortable with things like self-promotion and mentioning my book when I do a podcast or when I go on stage, because all of that helps get the word out, and the more word that's out, the better. And in this day and age, you just can't afford to be bashful. And I've always just been like bashful and like didn't want to be all salesy when I would do public appearances of any kind. It's been challenging for me to get over that just on a personal level.
Right. I think a lot of authors feel that way, you know.
They absolutely do. A lot of them are introverts like me. Like they don't want to talk at all, let alone like go out there and schmooze and like pitch their book all the time.
Right.
You know?
Well, yeah, it is difficult. And if we, like you just said, certain people have different personalities. And
yes.
Some people, it's very easy to walk out and say, I'm the best and I can do this and I can do that.
Right.
But yeah, even I saw raising our children that I didn't realize, but I was trying to tell them, you know, you can't be so boastful. And now they're in their 20s and they're like, well, I'm telling them, oh, you have to boast about it. But, you know, you told me that's not right. And I'm like, oh, well, actually, now you have to. Yeah. You know, you're your best advocate.
We changed our mind.
Yeah, but it's interesting how it's instilled in some people, and it is difficult.
Yes. It's a fine line, though, because I think you don't want to be like boastful and annoying and always like plugging your stuff. Like you want to be thinking of it in terms of being in service to your audience. So if somebody's interested in this topic, you have something that they might be interested in. And you're doing that out of a mindset of service to them and not out of like, I want to sell books, so you should buy my book. Like nobody's interested in hearing that.
Right. Mm-hmm. Excellent word, service. You're providing a service.
Right.
But if you can entertain someone with your book and give them some ideas on marketing or starting a business or starting a brand, why not?
Why not?
Be funny and informative.
Well, I think that's what you have going for you, because I know that Matt likes to listen to a lot of leadership and marketing podcasts, and I
drives Leah crazy.
Yeah, I don't really get it. And I think maybe after speaking with you that you seem more personable and maybe more down to earth, and maybe that will, I could see myself listening to your podcast where I could not listen to other people's. So your personality plays a big role in it also.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Leah. So I have two podcasts, one of which I'm sure you would not be interested in. It's How to Write Funny. I interview comedians about how they write comedy. And the other one, Matt, I know you would be interested in, which is not launched yet, but it's called Outrageous Entrepreneurship, based on the title of my book, obviously. And it's me and a co-host, a fellow entrepreneur, and we just talk about the kind of day-to-day realities of starting a business and building a business.
Great. And when will that be out?
Pretty soon. We don't have a timeline, but we've got a few episodes in the can, and we're pretty close.
Excellent. So let us know, and we'll put that on our Facebook page.
I will. Thank you.
Sure. This episode of the Author Inside You podcast is brought to you by Scribophile. It's a great writing resource if you're looking for beta readers. So I'm part of a writers group on Facebook, and one of the other members was asking about getting some beta readers for some of her work. So I naturally suggested Scribophile, and she had this to say.
I posted a story last night after gaining enough karma points by providing a critique and received my first critique on a creative nonfiction piece this morning.
Now that is fast. You sign up for Scribophile at night, you give a critique to somebody else's work, you gain enough karma points, you upload one of your works, and already you have a beta reader that you're looking for. That's pretty cool.
You might be asking, what are karma points? Well, you earn them by critiquing other works or having members like and react to your critiques. If you leave a critique for a community member, you will gain karma points. And then if other community members read your critique and think that you are doing a good job, they can react to it and you can earn even more karma points.
If you're looking for beta readers and a critique of your work, check out Scribophile at scribophile.com.
When did it hit you that the Onion really made it big and were you just like, I can't believe this is my life?
Oh, that's such a great question because it's one of those things that happens so slowly that you don't realize it until it's happened. But I'll tell you a couple of stories. So one story, I was on the Conan O'Brien show as an author. They used to have authors on those talk shows at late night TV. They don't do that anymore. And my book was
if you're Michelle Obama, they'll have you on.
Yeah.
Well, sure, of course. But she wasn't on because she was an author.
Yes.
Right, yeah, you're right.
And I was coming off that show and meeting my agent and my manager and my lit agent. I had 2 agents. I had a press guy and I had a manager, and they all met me afterwards and took me out. And my book was #1 on the bestseller list. And I thought, okay, I've made it. Like I knew at that point that I had made it.
Yeah.
But like it is hard up to that point because when you're a writer, especially, you're just sequestered in your little cubicle, pouring out words, and you don't know what's going on in the outside world. So the second story I'll tell about that was, so when The Onion started, it was a campus humor publication in Madison, Wisconsin. And my dream was just for The Onion to be mentioned in the same breath as the Harvard Lampoon. That was my highest aspiration for The Onion. And I remember once a few years into it, it was about maybe 8 years into The Onion. We had expanded to a few other cities. I thought we were doing some really good work. We had just gone online. We were the first humor publication to go online. So we were literally the first humor website ever.
Wow.
And so people were discovering us. But I was, sequestered in my cubicle and just working away. And I saw this newspaper insert in the campus newspaper. They had this full-color national insert that they would put in the newspaper that just had national college news. And on the back page, it was a big spread interviewing the editors of some prominent college humor publications, including the Harvard Lampoon and some other big ones. And I looked at it and my heart sank because I was like, oh no, why aren't we in there? Why is the Harvard Lampoon? It's like the Dartmouth something or other. And I just felt sick. Like, why am I doing all this work and we're not even considered like a major college humor publication? And then I read the piece, and it was an interview with like the editor of each one, and it was like 5 questions or whatever. What's your publication? What's the most trouble you've gotten into or whatever? And the last question for each one was, where do you want to work when you're out of college? And each one of them, every single one of them said The Onion.
Oh,
wow.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, okay,
That's
we
fine.
just somehow leapfrogged
Wow.
the competition. I felt so good about that.
Yes.
Wow, that is a great story.
Wow. Well, I remember personally reading some article and thinking it was true. Then someone told me, oh no, that's The Onion. And I'm like, what? And
Well, that's how you find it first, right?
That is sometimes, well, nowadays with most people seeing it on Facebook, it's hard to know. But in the early days, it was a free newspaper on the street, and it was easier to know it was fake. And it was just more entertaining to see this wacky news on a newspaper on the street. It's a totally different way that people discover it now.
Right. Well, Scott, what kind of advice do you have for somebody who's working on a book and they haven't yet published it?
I encounter people like that a lot because I have a lot of students, and people often come to me for advice. Based on what people say to me and how they come to me, I determined that 99% of the time, the problem that authors are having has nothing to do with their book. It has nothing to do with how well they're going to market their book. the problem has to do with how anxious they are about the fact that nobody's going to buy their book.
Yes.
And that stops them from publishing it.
Yes.
So my advice would be very simple. Stop thinking about how many people are going to buy your book. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because you're correct. No one will buy your first book. It doesn't matter. Unless your book has an audience pre-built in, like I did with my first book, unless your book is based on a popular, known thing that people already know, like a brand that people know, you're never going to sell any books. The way you're going to sell books is by putting one book out there, getting comfortable with the fact that you put that book out there, and then doing a second book. And then your second book will be better. You'll learn more. You'll be more comfortable. You'll be less anxious. And you're going to do everything you can to pitch the book. You're going to mention it on Facebook. You're going to mention it to your friends and family. And you're going to get feedback about the cover and about the book itself. And so your second book is going to have a better cover. It's going to be a better book. And then your third book is going to be better still. And most authors don't really do well until they've put out a few books, because you just need to get over all of that anxiety of that fear of failure that people start out with.
Very interesting.
Right.
That would be my advice. Just keep writing them, putting them out. Because here's the thing. If you want to write a book and put it out, then you should be writing a book and putting it out. You should not let your anxieties stop you. If you're letting your anxieties stop you, then you need to ask yourself the serious question, do you really want to put out a book? Maybe you just think you want to. Because if you really wanted to, you would do it and you wouldn't let anything stop you.
Right. And we've talked to plenty of people who've done it pretty quickly.
Yeah. You can get lucky. Like your first book might sell, but don't count on that. And don't get upset if it doesn't, And do your research. Like, research your topic. Make sure there's enough interest in what you're doing that it will sell.
Well, just listening to your story about how difficult it was with your first book and all the hoops you had to jump through, I mean, it sounds like it was close to impossible to publish a book, your first book, when you did your first book. But now you can do it all and not even talk to anybody.
Exactly. Yeah, nobody was self-publishing books in 1989 or whatever. But now, and that's another thing people are concerned about, is there's too much competition. There's so many books out there. But it doesn't matter now. Like, whatever niche you're in, there are people who are interested in that niche if you choose wisely. So, yeah, I love that there's no barrier to entry now. Like, what I wouldn't give to go back in time and have Amazon and the internet be there. And we didn't even talk about that. Like, that's another bit of advice I would give is, and I hate to say this because Amazon is such a monopoly and I wish that things were better, wish there was more competition, but I don't mess around with the other booksellers, because when you sell your book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and iTunes or whatever else, Amazon punishes you and they give you almost half the royalties. So when you go on Amazon, you're getting Amazon exclusively. I mean, you're getting the 70%, and 85% of your sales are going to come from Amazon anyway. So my feeling is, if they ever decide to break up Amazon, like if the government decides it's too big of a monopoly, they're going to break it up like Standard Oil, that's fine. I'll deal with that. But for now, the reality is that the smart business move is to just be on Amazon.
Sure. Well, we've talked to lots of people, and they do sell on Barnes & Noble and on Amazon, but we've never heard that you can get penalized for doing that.
Yeah, you're penalized. People have their reasons for doing it because they want to diversify, which is smart, and they're concerned that if Amazon ever changed too many of their rules or decided to pull their book, then that would like pull the rug out from under their entire business. So, there are pros and cons. I have simply opted to go with Amazon because I feel like the pros outweigh the cons.
There's always something to fear, but you got to move on.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Scott, what's a good way for our listeners to get in touch with you?
Well, if they are interested in writing comedy, they can find me at howtowritefunny.com, where there's information on my books, and there's actually free books you can download, free ebooks. And I have a podcast there, the How to Write Funny podcast, which I mentioned, and you can reach me through there. And if you're interested in entrepreneurship and starting a business or marketing, that podcast has not yet launched, but it'll be Outrageous Entrepreneurship, and that'll be available at outrageousentrepreneurship.com. And I'm also on Twitter at Scott Dikkers, and Scott Dikkers is 2 Ks, no C. I'm on Facebook. It's Scott Dikkers on Facebook is my Facebook page. And I'm on Instagram. I think I'm also It's Scott Dikkers on Instagram as well. But I'm not It's Scott Dikkers on Twitter. I'm just Scott Dikkers.
Okay.
Because I created that Twitter account way back when nobody else was trying to get my name on there.
Right.
So there's one other guy named Scott Dikkers, and he somehow laid a claim on all this other social media. So
He was fast.
he is totally entitled to his own
Right.
name.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, we'll add all that to our show notes. So there's lots of ways to get information from you and lots of ways to connect. So fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the Author Inside You podcast. And until next time,
Right on.
Thank you for listening to the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.